Good evening, dear ones. Tonight we venture into a magical journey. We're entering the enchanting realm of The Snow Queen, penned by Hans Christian Andersen. The devil, in the form of a troll, has made a magic mirror that distorts the appearance of everything that it reflects. The mirror reflects no good and beautiful aspects of people and things, and magnifies their bad and ugly aspects. The troll's minions take the mirror all over the world to distort everything, then carry it up to heaven to mock God and the angels. As they approach heaven, the mirror trembles and falls, shattering into billions of pieces. Some become window panes, some spectacles, and some get stuck in people's hearts and eyes, giving them a cold and bitter disposition. The troll laughs himself sore at his mischief. Years later, a little boy Kai and a little girl Gerda live next door to each other in the garrets of buildings with adjoining roofs in a large city. They could get from one's home to the other's just by stepping over the gutters of each building. The two families grow vegetables and roses in window boxes placed on the gutters. Gerda and Kai have a window box garden to play in, and they become devoted to each other as playmates and as close as if they were siblings. Gerda's grandmother tells the children about the Snow Queen, who is ruler over the snow bees, snowflakes that look like bees. As bees have a queen, so do the snow bees, and she is seen where the snowflakes cluster the most. Looking out of his frosted window one winter, Kai sees the Snow Queen, who beckons him to come with her. Kai draws back in fear from the window. By the following spring, Gerda has learned a song that she sings to Kai. Roses flower in the vale. There we hear child Jesus' tale. Because roses adorn the window box garden, the sight of roses always reminds Gerda of her love for Kai. On a summer day, splinters of the troll's mirror get into Kai's heart and eye. Kai becomes cruel and aggressive. He destroys their window box garden, he makes fun of Gerda's grandmother, and he no longer cares about Gerda, since everyone now appears bad and ugly to him. When winter comes again, the only things he finds no fault in are snowflakes, which he studies through a magnifying glass. Kai goes out with his sled to play in the snowy market square and hitches it to a sleigh driven by a mysterious robed figure. The sleigh drives through the town gate, going faster and faster through the countryside, then stops, and the driver reveals herself to be the Snow Queen. She kisses Kai to numb him from the cold, and again to make him forget about Gerda and his family. They then fly together in the sleigh up into the clouds. How did little Gerda cope when Kay didn't return? The village was clueless about his whereabouts. All the kids remembered was a scene of Kay attaching his tiny sled to a large sleigh, which then rolled down the street, exiting the town. No one could trace Kay's path after that. Grief flooded their hearts. Gerda's sobs echoed the loudest. Speculation stirred that he met his end in the nearby river. The winter seemed to extend its stay, painting every day with a tinge of melancholy, but eventually arrived, bringing with it rays of hope. Gerda would murmur, "Kay is no more," to which the sunshine responded, "I refuse to believe so." This conversation was repeated with the swallows, who shared the sunshine's disbelief. Gradually, Gerda started questioning her conviction. One morning she decided, "I'll put on my new red shoes, the ones Kay has never seen, and I'll go down by the river to inquire about him." As the dawn broke, she gently kissed her sleeping grandmother, donned her red shoes, and set out alone through the town gate towards the river. "Is it true that you have taken my dear friend? I'll give you my red shoes if you will bring him back to me." It seemed to her that the waves nodded unusually. She took off her cherished red shoes and tossed them into the river, but they landed near the shore, and the small waves gently nudged them back to her. It seemed as though the river resisted taking her prized possession, as it lacked little Kay. Fear gripped her, thinking she hadn't thrown them far enough. So, she climbed into a boat nestled among reeds, walked its length, and hurled her shoes into the water once more. The boat wasn't tied down, and her actions caused it to drift away. She noticed this and attempted to return to shore. But by the time she reached the opposite end of the boat, it had already distanced itself from the bank and was quickly drifting further away. Little Gerda was petrified. She began to sob, with only the sparrows around to hear her. They were unable to bring her to land, but they flew close, chirping, "We are here, here we are," seemingly to soothe her. The boat was caught in the river's swift current, and Gerda sat there, frozen, her shoes adrift behind her. They couldn't keep up with her as the boat was moving faster. The riverbanks were breathtaking, adorned with beautiful flowers, ancient trees, and pastures for cattle and sheep. But Gerda saw no one. "Maybe the river will lead me to little Kay," she mused, and that sparked a flicker of hope in her. She stood up and eagerly scanned the lush green banks for hours. She soon found in a massive cherry orchard housing a quaint house with peculiar red and blue windows. Its roof was thatched, and 2 wooden soldiers stood guard outside, saluting the passing vessels. Gerda assumed they were real and hailed them, but to no avail. The current steered the boat closer to them, prompting Gerda to call out even louder. An elderly woman emerged from the house, relying on a bent stick for support. She wore a large sun hat adorned with beautifully painted flowers. "You poor little child," the woman exclaimed. "However did you get lost on this big swift river, and however did you drift so far into the great wide world?" The old woman waded right into the water, caught hold of the boat with her crooked stick, pulled it into shore, and lifted little Gerda out of it. Gerda was very glad to be on dry land again, but she felt a little apprehensive encountering a peculiar old woman who initiated a conversation with her. "I'm curious to know your story, who you are, and what brought you here," prompted Gerda to share her entire journey. The elderly lady listened to her saga with an inscrutable expression, occasionally murmuring, under her breath. When Gerda's story reached the part about her quest for Kay, the woman admitted that Kay hadn't passed through, yet he might do so any day. She encouraged Gerda not to fret, but rather to take pleasure in her cherries and admire her enticing flowers. These blooms were far more captivating than any illustrations, each harboring its unique narrative. With that, she led Gerda into her quaint house, securing the entrance behind them. The windows were intriguingly high up on the walls, and through their rainbow-hued panes, sunlight danced in, casting a melange of vibrant hues around. The centerpiece of the room was a table laden with the luscious cherries, which Gerda, now at ease, savored to her heart's content. As Gerda feasted on the fruit, the old woman brushed her hair with a golden comb. The comb ran through Gerda's locks, transforming them into glossy ringlets that framed her rosy, radiant face. The woman's gaze softened at the sight. "I've longed for a delightful little girl like you," she confessed, anticipating the bond they would share. As she continued combing, Gerda's worries about Kay started to fade away, a testament to the woman's subtle, magical prowess. Yet she was not a malevolent witch. Her involvement with magic was purely for entertainment. Her sole desire was to keep Gerda close. To ensure this, she walked into her garden, her gnarled stick pointing at the flourishing rose bushes. In the height of their splendor, the bushes withered into the earth, leaving no sign of their existence. The woman feared that the sight of roses might spark Gerda's memories of Kay and her own roses, triggering her to leave. Following this, Gerda was introduced to the floral haven. The garden was a sight to behold, a myriad of flowers from all seasons in full bloom, their scent wafting through the air. No picture book could ever capture the garden's unadulterated beauty. Gerda reveled in the garden's charm, playing until the setting sun was swallowed by the towering cherry trees. The day concluded with Gerda being tucked into a plush bed under a resplendent red silk coverlet adorned with blue violets. There she slept, and there she dreamed as gloriously as any queen on her wedding day. The next morning she again went out into the warm sunshine to play with the flowers, and this she did for many a day. The beauty of spring was all around her, with nature blooming in every corner in a vibrant display of colors and fragrances. This was Gerda's favorite time of year, her heart swelling with the joy of each new day. She loved the flowers, each one unique and special. She knew every flower by heart, cherishing their distinct scents and shades. In the midst of this plentiful array, there was always this nagging feeling that something was missing, a void that she couldn't quite place. One day, while she sat contemplating under the shade of a large oak tree, her eyes fell on the old woman's sun hat. The hat was a kaleidoscope of colors, each flower painted with such delicate precision it felt as though they could spring to life at any moment. The prettiest of all the flowers painted on it was a rose, its crimson hue contrasting vividly with the white of the Gerda. Traced her fingers over the painted rose, she realized what was missing: the real roses. The old woman had forgotten this rose on her hat when she made the real roses disappear in the earth, a testament to the thoughtlessness that sometimes accompanies old age. Gerda immediately questioned, "Why aren't there any roses here?" Her heart pounded with anticipation as she rushed out among the flower beds, her eyes scanning the sea of blooms for that familiar shade of red. She searched high and low, but there wasn't a single rose to be seen. A wave of sadness washed over her and she sat down on the soft grass, her tears flowing freely. As if by some divine intervention, her tears fell on the very spot where a rose bush had sunk into the ground. When her warm tears moistened the earth, the bush sprang up again, as full of blossoms as when it disappeared. It was a sight to behold, a miracle of life born from her tears. Overwhelmed, Gerda hugged the bush gently, her lips brushing against the delicate petals of the roses as she kissed them. She remembered her own pretty roses and thought of little Kay. "Oh, how long I have been delayed," the little girl said. "I should have been looking for Kay. Don't know where he is?" she asked the roses. "Do you think that he is dead and gone?" "He isn't dead," the roses told her. "We have been down in the earth where the dead people are, but Kay is not there." "Thank you," said little Gerda, who went to all the other flowers, put her lips near them and asked, "Do you know where little Kay is?" But every flower stood in the sun and dreamed its own fairy tale or its story. Flower had its own tale to tell, their narratives branching out different directions, but none of them knew anything about Kay. Despite this, Gerda found solace in their stories, each one a little piece in the puzzle of the grand scheme of life. The tiger lily spoke of a somber tale, its narrative resounding with the boom of drums and chants of priests. The trumpet flower, on the other hand, recounted a tale of longing and hope, its story as captivating as the maiden it spoke of. The little snowdrop shared a whimsical tale of a swing and bubbles, its story filled with innocence and playfulness. Each story was unique, and each flower told it with a different emotion. Gerda listened to these tales, her heart yearning to understand their underlying meanings. Though she didn't understand all of them, she appreciated their beauty. "That's my fairy tale," said the lily. "I am talking about my story, my own dream," the trumpet flower replied. "It may be a very pretty story, but you told it very sadly and you didn't mention Kay at all. What did the hyacinth say?" "Hear our tale, little one. 3 sisters, ethereal like specters in the moonlight, danced in our midst. One, the eldest, donned a vibrant red dress, as radiant as a fiery sunset. The second, robed in a blue dress, reflected the tranquil hues of the deep sea. And the third, the youngest, was arrayed in a dress as white as snow, pure and untouched. They spun and twirled under the silver glow of the moon, their laughter a melody floating over the still surface of the lake nearby. Despite their otherworldly beauty, they were not creatures of magic. They were as human as you and I. The night air was sweet with their presence, and slowly they disappeared into the depths of the shadowy forest. The air, sweeter still, heavy with the scent of unseen flowers. A haunting sight then emerged from the forest. 3 coffins, each cradling a sister, floated across the lake as if guided by unseen hands. Fireflies danced around them, their glow flickering like tiny lanterns in the night. A question hung in the air. Were the sisters sleeping, or were they indeed dead? The aroma of the flowers whispered fate. They were no more. The solemn toll of the evening bell echoed across the lake, a mournful dirge for their funeral. "You are making me sad," lamented little Gerda. "Your scent so pungent, it paints vivid images of the departed sisters. It makes me think of my dear friend Kay. Could he too have crossed to the other side? The roses reject the thought. They've been buried under the snow, and yet they speak of life." "Ding dong," chimed the hyacinth bells. "We do not toll for Kay. We do not possess knowledge of him. We are merely singing our song, the only one we've ever known." And so, Gerda ventured to the buttercup, glowing amidst the glossy green leaves. "You are a tiny sun," she commented. "Tell me, Do you know where my friend is?" The buttercup looked up at Gerda, its golden petals shimmering in the sunlight. It began its tale. In a small courtyard on the very first day of spring, the morning sun painted everything a warm golden hue. A pretty maidservant, poor but kind-hearted, visited her dear grandmother. Their love was a treasure richer than any gold. "That's my story," concluded the buttercup. "Oh, my dear old grandmother," Gerda sighed. "She must be so worried. She might be grieving for me, just as she did for Kay. I must return home, and I'll bring Kay along. The flowers, they sing their own songs. They haven't any news of Kay." Then, hitching up her little skirts to run faster, she felt the narcissus tap against her leg. She paused and bent down to the tall flower. "Perhaps you have something to tell me," she said. What did the narcissus say? "I can see myself, I can see myself. Oh, how sweet is my own fragrance." Nearby in a small loft, there is a delicate dancer, barely dressed. First she balances on one leg, then on both, scornfully kicking her heels at the world. She's an enchantress of the stage. She pours water from a teapot onto a cloth. Her corset, how virtuous cleanliness is. Her dress, pure white, dangles from a hook. It too has been laundered in the teapot and sun-dried on top of the roof. She dons it, tying a saffron scarf around her neck to enhance the white. Point your toes. Look how she maintains her balance on that singular stem. "I can see myself, I can see myself." Gerda, unimpressed, retorted, "I'm not interested," and dismissed the tale. She sprinted towards the garden's end, and although the gate was locked, she manipulated the rusty latch until it gave way and the gate swung open. Gerda, in her bare feet, dashed into the vast world. She glanced back thrice, but no one pursued her. Eventually, she could run no more, so she rested on a large stone. Looking up, she realized summer had passed, and it was already late fall. She couldn't fathom it within the splendid garden where sunlight never ceased, and seasonal flowers were always in their prime. "Gracious, how long I've dallied!" Gerda exclaimed. "Fall is here. I must continue." She rose to resume running, but fatigue and sore feet slowed her down. The world around her seemed bleak and cold. The long willow leaves had yellowed, and wet mist fell from them like droplets. One leaf after another fell to the ground. Only the blackthorn bore fruit, so sour it would make you grimace. Oh, how dreary and gray the wide world looked. The next time that Gerda, the little girl with a heart full of courage and determination, found herself compelled to take a breather, a colossal crow, black as the night sky, came bouncing across the expanse of pure white snow in front of her. The crow, a creature of curiosity and intelligence, had been observing her from a distance for quite some time, tilting his shiny black head to one side as he studied her with a keen interest. Choosing his moment to break the silence, he croaked out a friendly greeting. "Caw, caw, good caw day." His vocabulary was limited, yet his intentions were clear and friendly. Despite his limited language skills, he managed to convey a feeling of warmth and friendliness towards the lonely girl. Curious about her solitary journey through the vast, endless world, he inquired about her destination. Gerda, who was all too familiar with the loneliness of her journey, understood his question when he said, "Alone." Taking his friendly overture as an opportunity to share her story, she narrated her tale to the crow, a tale filled with joy, loss, and a relentless search for her dear friend Kay. Her voice trembled as she asked the crow if he had seen her lost companion. The crow responded positively, nodding his head gravely and cawing, "Maybe I have, maybe I have." Upon hearing this, Gerda was overjoyed. She cried out, barely able to contain her excitement, and nearly smothered the crow with her affectionate kisses. The crow gently reminded her to be careful and confirmed that he might have seen Kay. But with a twist, Kay had perhaps forgotten Gerda for a princess. Gerda's heart fell at this revelation, but she quickly asked, "Does he live with a princess?" The crow confirmed this and mentioned his difficulty in translating his language into human speech, wishing Gerda could understand crow language to make the conversation easier. Gerda confessed her lack of knowledge in this area, but seemed hopeful. Undeterred by the language barrier, the crow promised to tell her everything he knew and began unraveling the story. Sharing an intriguing tale about a highly intelligent princess, The crow spoke of a kingdom where the princess had read and forgotten all the world's newspapers, demonstrating her brilliance. The princess, bored on her throne, hummed an old tune, the refrain of which was, "Why, oh, why shouldn't I get married?" "Why, that's an idea!" she exclaimed, almost startling herself with the resolution and foresight in her voice. She decided, right then and there, to marry as soon as she could find the right sort of husband. Not just any man would do, no. She desired one who could not only stand tall and look impressive, but also carry an intelligent conversation, responding with wit and wisdom when to. The idea of a silent, stoic, and dashing man was overrated. She had seen enough of those. She wanted a man who would stimulate her, challenge her, make her laugh and hold her interest, not just a handsome face. She had the drums beaten to summon all her ladies-in-waiting, and when she shared her idea, they were thrilled. "Oh, we like that," they echoed, their eyes twinkling with excitement. "We were just thinking the very same thing." "Believe me," the crow interjected, eager to continue the narration. "Every word I tell you is true. I have a gentle lady-love who roams freely around the palace, and I heard the whole story from her." Of course, his lady-love was also a crow, for as they say, birds of a feather flock together. The newspapers were quick to print the news with a border of hearts and the initials of the princess. It was announced publicly that any young man who considered himself worthy was welcome to try his luck at the palace. The one who could hold the best conversation and who felt most comfortable in the palace surroundings would be selected by the princess as her spouse. "Yes, yes," the crow reiterated. "Believe me, it's as real as my existence." Men swarmed the palace in hopes of winning the princess's heart. But despite the crowd, no one was chosen on the first or the second day. Many could talk freely in the streets, but once inside the palace walls, words failed them. They were awestruck by the grandeur of the palace and the sight of the princess enthroned. The best they could manage was to parrot the last word of the princess's conversation, and she wasn't interested in hearing her words echoed back at her. As for the ones who had come prepared with food and drink, they didn't share with their fellow candidates. Every man thought, let him appear weak and hungry so the princess won't choose him. "But Kay, little Kay," Gerda interrupted. "When did he come? Was he among those people?" "Give me time, give me time." This tale unfolds with intricate details, so we mustn't rush past them. The event transpired on the third day, when a simple person, devoid of any royal entourage or regal carriage, ambled confidently towards the grand palace. His eyes, radiant like yours, held a captivating sparkle, and his hair flowed down to his shoulders, an emblem of his rugged handsomeness. However, his attire was rather modest and unpretentious. "Ah, that must be Kay," Gerda said. Her childlike excitement was palpable as she clapped her hands in glee. "I've finally found him." The crow started adding more detail. "He had a small knapsack on his back," Gerda quickly interjected. "No, that must have been his sled," she was quite certain. "He was carrying it when he left." "It could be," the crow conceded. "I didn't pay close attention. However, my dear companion mentioned that when he passed through the palace gates and laid eyes on the silver-clad guardsmen and on the staircase the footmen attired in gold, he wasn't the least bit intimidated. He greeted them with a nod and casually remarked, 'It must be tiring to stand on the stairs. I would rather go inside.' The palace was alighted brilliantly. State ministers and privy councillors were seen strolling barefooted, carrying golden trays in front of them. The scene was incredibly solemn. His boots echoed loudly, but he didn't seem the least bit disturbed. "That certainly must have been Kay," Gerda said with utter certainty. "I remember he had new boots. I heard them creaking in grandmother's room." "Oh, they creaked quite loudly," responded the crow. "However, he didn't seem to have a care in the world as he walked straight up to the princess, seated on a pearl as massive as a spinning wheel. All the ladies-in-waiting with their attendants and the lords-in-waiting with their gentlemen, and each of their pages were present. The closer they stood to the door, the more arrogant they appeared. The gentlemen's men's pages were almost disdainful to behold as they stood near the threshold. "That must have been daunting," Little exclaimed. "And yet Kay won the princess?" The crow replied with a hint of envy. "If I were not a crow, I would have wed her myself, despite my engagement to another. I heard from my partner that he spoke as eloquently as I do when I communicate in crow language. He was dashing and handsome, and he was not there to woo the princess, but to hear her wisdom. This he admired, and she reciprocated his feelings. Gerda confirmed with surety. Of course it was Kay. He was so intelligent that he could carry out mental arithmetic even with fractions. "Oh, please guide me to the palace." "That's easy to say," said the crow, displaying apprehension. "But how can we accomplish it?" "I'll discuss it with my partner, who may have a solution, but I must warn you that a little girl like you will hardly be admitted." "Oh, yes, I shall," said Gerda, full of determination. "Once Kay hears about me, he won't hesitate to come out and fetch me at once." "Wait for me beside that stile," the crow said. He wagged his head and off he flew. The night had fallen when he returned. "Caw, caw," he said. "My lady love sends you her best wishes, and here's a small loaf of bread for you. She found it in the kitchen, where they have all the bread they need, and you must be famished. You absolutely cannot enter the palace with those bare feet. The silver-clad guardsmen and gold-dressed footmen would never tolerate it, but don't shed a tear. We'll find a solution. My lady love is aware of a tiny back staircase that leads directly to the bedroom, and she knows where they keep the key to it." Then they went into the garden and down the wide pathway where leaves gently descended. The palace lights dimmed one by one. Guided by the crow, little Gerda approached the slightly ajar back door. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Despite the fear, she was driven by the desperate hope that it was indeed little Kay. His sparkling eyes and long hair vivid in her memory, she was certain it was him. She remembered his smile from their time under the home roses. The thought of his joy upon seeing her brought her comfort. She imagined his intrigue at her tales of the journey she undertook to find him, and the sorrow that enveloped everyone when he failed to return home. Fear gripped her heart, but happiness bloomed within her too. They stood on the stairway in the dim light of a small lamp atop a cabinet. The crow cocked her head towards Gerda. Gerda, remembering her manners, curtsied as her grandmother had taught her. "My fiancé speaks highly of you," said the crow. "Your life story is quite touching. Take this lamp, and I'll guide you. We'll stick to the main hallway. It's usually deserted." "I feel like we aren't alone," said Gerda, sensing movement behind them. Shadows danced on the walls, resembling skeletal horses and figures of nobility on horseback. "They're just dreams," reassured the crow. "They come to whisk away the thoughts of their royal masters. This is an advantage for you, as they won't notice you. Remember this kindness when you rise to power." "There's no need for such formalities," said the forest crow. Now they entered the first room. It was draped with pink satin blooms. The dream shadows raced by, making it impossible for Gerda to recognize the lords and ladies. She wandered through a series of grand halls, each more than the last, until she arrived in the royal bedroom. The ceiling resembled a massive palm tree made of shimmering glass leaves. Two beautiful beds, suspended from a golden stem, occupied the room's center. Each bed looked like a lily. One was white, housing the princess, and the other was red. Gerda approached the red bed, hoping to find Kay. She gently turned a scarlet petal and saw a familiar brown neck. She believed it was Kay and called out his name, bringing the lamp closer. However, as the dreams rode back into the room, the figure awoke, revealing not Kay, but a handsome prince. The princess, awakened by the commotion, peered out from her white lily bed and questioned the disturbance. Tears streamed down Gerda's face as she narrated her journey and the crow's assistance. The prince and the princess empathized with Gerda, commending the crows. They offered the crows a choice: freedom or becoming court crows with kitchen privileges. The crows, considering their future, humbly accepted the latter. The prince, demonstrating his generosity, surrendered his bed to Gerda. She gratefully acknowledged the kindness of the people and the birds, marveling at their benevolence. As she closed her eyes, the dreams returned. They appeared angelic, leading a sled with Kay on it. He greeted her with a nod, but it was only a figment of her dreams and vanished as she woke up. The next day, she was adorned from head to toe in silk and velvet. The palace inhabitants urged her to stay, but she had a singular request: A modest carriage, a horse, and petite boots, her tools to embark on a journey to find Kay. They provided her boots and a hand muff, dressing her in the finest garb. Poised to depart, a shiny gold carriage awaited her at the palace gates, the prince and princess's emblem gleaming like a star. The staff, adorned with golden crowns, stood at attention. The royal couple assisted her into the carriage, wishing her well on her journey. The forest crow, now wed, accompanied her for the first few miles, sharing the carriage with Gerda, as sitting backwards disoriented him. His crow companion stayed behind at the gate, her wings waving them off. A headache, consequence of overindulgence in her elevated status, prevented her from joining. The carriage interior was a feast for the senses, lined with sugary cookies, with seats overflowing with fruit and gingerbread. "Fare you well," the royal couple bid them, their voices echoing in the air. Little Gerda wept, as did the crow, their tears marking the first miles of the journey. Soon after, the crow bid his farewell, a subdued, sorrowful goodbye that tugged at their hearts. He ascended to a tree, flapping his ebony wings as a parting salute, watching as the carriage, radiant as the sun, disappeared in the distance. He flew up into a tree and waved his big black wings as long as he could see the carriage, which flashed as brightly as the sun. The carriage, an elegant symbol of royalty, continued its journey into an ominous, silent forest. The path, cloaked in the impenetrable darkness of the night, was illuminated by the carriage, which glowed like a beacon, a blazing torch in the eyes of some lurking robbers hidden in the shadows. The sight of this golden glow was unbearable for the robbers. Their greedy eyes widened and they were filled with avarice. "That's gold! That's gold!" Their hearts echoed with a deafening cry, potential wealth. Suddenly, they sprang forward, their intentions clear and their faces masked with a terrifying grimace. With swift precision, they seized the horses, the reins slipping into their grimy hands, their guttural laughs echoing through the tranquil forest, shattering the peace. The innocent little postilions, the experienced coachman, and the footman met their untimely end at the hands of these ruthless men, their lives snuffed out without mercy. Next, they dragged little Gerda out of the confines of the carriage, a vulnerable, frightened girl in the clutches of hardened criminals. "How plump and tender she looks, just as if she'd been fattened on nuts," mused the old robber woman. She was a grotesque figure, with a long, bristly beard and eyebrows that hung down over her eyes like a curtain of neglect. "She looks like a fat little lamb. What a dainty dish she will make." Her cruel laughter filled the air. She drew out her knife, a dreadful, sharp instrument that shimmered ominously under the moonlight. Just as she was about to wield it, a sharp pain pierced her ear. Her own little daughter had bitten her. The girl, a wild, reckless creature, was the one thing that stood between Gerda and her impending doom. "You beastly brat!" the mother yelped, the pain causing her to forget Gerda momentarily. "She's mine," the little robber girl announced, her tone authoritative. "She must share her pretty dress and fluffy muff with me and sleep by my side in my bed." And before anyone could react, she bit her mother again, causing the old woman to hop and whirl around in pain. The robbers broke into raucous laughter, their cruel voices echoing through the forest. "Look at her, dancing with her brat," they howled. The little robber girl, not affected by their laughter, demanded to ride the carriage. She was a spoiled, headstrong child who always got her way. And so she and Gerda climbed into the carriage, driving over the rough terrain deeper into the forest. The girl, although no taller than Gerda, was robust and her shoulders broad. Her skin was a shade deep brown, her eyes coal black, and full of a sadness that belied her actions. She wrapped her arms protectively around Gerda, whispering in a surprisingly gentle voice, "They shan't kill you unless I get angry with you. I think you must be a princess." Gerda shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "No, I'm not," she confessed. She told the robber girl about all that had happened to her love for little Kay, and her journey. The robber girl listened quietly, nodding in understanding. "Even if I should get angry with you, they shan't kill you because I'll do it myself," she declared, her tone firm. Then she wiped away Gerda's tears, took her hands and stuck them into Gerda's soft, warm muff. The carriage at last, halted in a robber's castle. Cracked fortifications ran from foundation to apex. Avian creatures burst from every loophole, and gigantic bulldogs, capable of consuming a man whole, leapt skywards. The hounds remained silent, per the rules. A fire roared in the central part of the stone-bedecked, smoke-filled old hall. The billowing smoke pursued its way out through the ceiling. A cauldron simmered with soup, and game, including hares and rabbits, sizzled on the spit. "Tonight you'll sleep here with me and my menagerie," said the robber girl. Following the consumption of their meal, they moved towards a corner that was carpeted with straw and rugs. Here, nearly 100 pigeons roosted on perches. Initially appearing asleep, they stirred slightly as young girls neared. "These are all mine," proclaimed the little robber girl, who promptly seized the nearest pigeon, shook it until it flapped its wings, and then demanded Gerda to kiss it. She gestured towards a hole in the wall, barred with sticks, where 2 mischievous birds were kept. These rascals would escape in an instant, if not confined. She then shifted her attention towards a reindeer tethered with a shiny copper ring named Bei, declaring him as her old sweetheart. "We must keep Bei under constant surveillance, else he'd escape. To ensure he stays, I tease him with my blade nightly. He's terrified of it." From a nook in the wall, she procured a long knife and ran it along the reindeer's neck. The reindeer responded with a kick, provoking laughter from the robber girl, who then pulled Gerda onto the bed. "Are you going to sleep with that knife?" asked Gerda, her eyes reflecting her terror. "I always sleep with my knife," replied the robber girl. "You never know when it might be needed. Now tell me again what you said about little Kay and why you're journeying across the world." Gerda regaled the tale once more. The wild pigeons in their overhead cage cooed softly, providing a hum of background noise while the domesticated pigeons slept in serene peace. The little robber girl, who was the closest to Gerda at this time, had her arm wrapped tightly around Gerda's neck. She held her knife firmly in her other hand, meanwhile falling asleep, and soon began to snore so loudly that it echoed around the room. Gerda, however, was wide awake. She was overcome with fear and uncertainty, oblivious to whether she would live or die. The robbers gathered around the crackling fire, their laughter and singing in the night. They were drinking, toasting to their successful exploits, while the old robber woman displayed her agility by executing somersaults. This sight was terrifying for Gerda, a small, innocent girl who was unaccustomed to such wild behavior. Suddenly, the wood pigeons began to speak. "Coo, coo, we have seen Kay. He was perched on a white hen sled, seated in the Snow Queen's sleigh. We saw them as they swooped low over the trees where we lay nestled. The Snow Queen blew upon us, and all the young pigeons died except us. Coo, coo." "What are you saying?" Gerda called out, her voice shaky. "Where was the Snow Queen heading? Do you have any information?" The pigeons replied, "She was likely heading for Lapland, a place known for its constant snow and ice. Why don't you ask the reindeer tethered next to you?" The reindeer nodded. "Indeed, there is ice and snow in that glorious land. You can prance about across those vast, glittering fields. The Snow Queen has her summer tent there. Her stronghold is a castle located near the North Pole, on an island known as Spitsbergen." "Oh, Kay, little Kay," Gerda sighed, full of worry. "Lie still," the robber girl warned, "or I'll stick my knife in you." The next morning, Gerda relayed the wood pigeon's information to the little robber girl. The girl pondered it with a thoughtful expression. She nodded her head in agreement and declared, "Leave it to me." She asked the reindeer, "Do you know where Lapland is?" "Who knows it better than I?" the reindeer replied, his eyes glittering with excitement. "There I was born, there I was bred, and there I frolicked in the snow freely." "Listen, Gerda," the robber girl said. "As you see, all the men are away, and Mother is here. But she'll drink from the large bottle and fall asleep soon. As soon as that happens, I will do you a good turn." She jumped out of bed, filled with energy, and lunged to her mother, wrapping her arms around her neck. She affectionately tugged at her mother's beard bristles, chirping, "Good morning, my dear nanny goat." The mother playfully bopped her on the nose till it was a mixture of red and blue, a gesture made out of pure, unconditional love. As her mother fell into a deep sleep, the little robber girl turned her attention to the captive reindeer. She toyed with the idea of keeping it there, teasing it with her sharp knife. The reindeer was amusing when she did so, but she dismissed that idea, deciding instead to release it. She untied its rope and promised to guide it to the great outdoors where it could race back to its homeland, Lapland. She instructed the reindeer, however, that it must bear a responsibility. It was to carry a little girl, Gerda, to the palace of the Snow Queen, where her playmate was. The girl trusted the reindeer had heard the entire plan, as Gerda had spoken quite loudly, and the reindeer was in earshot. The reindeer, filled with joy, leaped high. Carefully, the robber girl lifted Gerda onto the reindeer's back, ensuring she was securely tied, and thoughtfully provided a small pillow for her comfort. The girl was determined to ensure Gerda was ready for the journey. "I don't do things halfway," she pronounced. She returned Gerda's fur boots, anticipating the freezing cold. She decided to keep Gerda's muff, admiring its beauty. However, she was considerate of Gerda's hands. She offered her mother's large mittens, ones that would reach Gerda's elbows. The mittens were so large that Gerda's hands looked the mother's paws. Gerda was moved to tears, but the robber girl quickly dismissed the sentimentality. She insisted Gerda should be cheerful. To ensure Gerda didn't go hungry, she gave her 2 loaves of bread and a ham. She strapped these provisions onto the reindeer's back. Then she summoned all the dogs and cut the reindeer's tether with her knife. She commanded the reindeer to run, but also to protect Gerda. Gerda, waving her mittens, bid farewell to the robber girl. With that, the reindeer, carrying Gerda, darted through the forest and across the plains at lightning speed, dodging obstacles with ease. The wolves howled and the ravens screeched. Peculiar red lights slashed through the sky, creating a noise resembling a sneeze. The reindeer identified them as the Northern Lights. It ran tirelessly day and night. The loaves were eaten and the whole ham was eaten, and there they were in Lapland. They stopped in front of the little hut, a humble and makeshift abode positioned in the wilderness. It was quaint and charming in its simplicity, with a roof that was so low it kissed the earth, creating an intriguing silhouette against the backdrop of the wild landscape. The entrance to the hut was a peculiar one, a doorway that was so low that anyone who wished to enter or leave the hut would find themselves lying flat on their stomachs. This design feature made it a unique spectacle in the otherwise uniform landscape. The hut seemed to lie dormant, devoid of life with the exception of an elderly Lap woman. She was huddled over a whale oil lamp, the warm orange glow illuminating features as she cooked fish. It was a tranquil domestic scene that contrasted starkly with the wild exterior of her home. The reindeer, her only company at that moment, relayed Gerda's entire story. However, the reindeer's story came first. He considered his tale more compelling. Moreover, Gerda was in no state to speak, her body trembling from the icy cold. The Lap woman expressed her sympathies. "Oh, you poor creatures," she lamented. "You've still got such a long way to go." She further explained that they would need to journey hundreds of miles into the Finnmark. That was where the Snow Queen was currently residing, illuminating the evening skies with her dazzling blue fireworks. She decided to send a message to aid them on their journey, etching it onto a dried codfish. It was an unusual choice, but she confessed she had no paper at hand. Gerda was tasked to deliver the message to the Finn woman who resided in the distant Finnmark. The Lap woman was confident that the Finn woman would provide them with more guidance. Once Gerda recovered a bit, consuming some food and drink, the woman inscribed a few words onto the dried fish. She advised Gerda to guard it carefully as it might hold the key to their success. The reindeer then whisked Gerda away, disappearing into the night that was ablaze with the spectacle of the Northern Lights. Their journey took them further north to the Finnmark. Here they discovered the Finn woman's home, marked by a chimney with no door. Inside, the heat was staggering, prompting the Finn woman to strip down to minimal clothing. She assisted Gerda, removing her winter gear and apparel so the young girl wouldn't wilt in the sweltering heat. The Finn woman then read the message from the codfish, repeating it thrice to commit it to memory. Subsequently, she tossed it into a simmering pot of soup, She believed in utilizing everything fully. The reindeer narrated his tale first, and then relayed Gerda's story. The Finn woman merely winked, her eyes gleaming with understanding, but she chose to remain silent. The reindeer told her his own story first, and then little Gerda's. The Finn woman winked a knowing eye, but she didn't say anything. "You are such a wise woman," said the reindeer. "I know you possess the power to manipulate the world's winds with just a thread of cotton. For each knot that a sailor loosens, diverse forces of wind are unleashed. The first knot releases a helpful breeze, while the second knot triggers a fierce windstorm. The release of the third and fourth knots lets loose a tempest so potent that it can flatten a forest's worth of trees. Could you, wise woman, prepare a potion for this innocent girl that would instill in her the strength of a dozen men? She needs such power to triumph over the Snow Queen." "The strength of 12 men?" retorted the Finn woman. "What good would that do?" She moved to her shelf, took down an ancient rolled-up skin and carefully unrolled it. The skin was scribbled with mysterious symbols. She began to read, her forehead beaded with sweat as she absorbed the arcane information. The reindeer, growing desperate, pleaded once more for Gerda's sake. Gerda's tear-filled eyes moved the woman's heart. The woman winked as she called the reindeer to a corner. As she applied another piece of ice to his head, she whispered, "Little Kay is indeed with the Snow Queen. He believes it's the best place imaginable, but that's because he's been manipulated by a splinter of glass in his heart and a shard in his eye. Unless those fragments are removed, he'll remain under the Snow Queen's control. Couldn't you concoct a potion for Gerda, then, to bestow upon her strength to overcome this? No power I could imbue would surpass the one she already wields. Have you not noticed how both men and beasts are drawn to her service, and how far she has journeyed barefoot in the wide world? We mustn't reveal this power to her. True strength resides in her pure heart. Only she can free Kay from the Snow Queen's grasp. If she fails, we can do nothing to aid her. The abode of the Snow Queen is roughly 8 miles from this place. You may carry Gerda to the large bush adorned with red berries in the snow near the Queen's garden. Then don't you stand there gossiping, but hurry to get back here." The Finn woman hoisted little Gerda onto the reindeer, and he bolted away with all the speed he could muster. Gerda cried out in dismay, "I left my boots and mittens behind!" The absence of these essentials soon became evident in the icy chill that cut through her like a blade. But the reindeer, driven by an urgent mission, could not afford to halt. He charged onwards until they reached a large bush adorned with vibrant red berries. Here he gently placed Gerda down and bestowed a tender kiss on her lips, tears reflecting the northern lights trickling down his face. Then he darted back, leaving Gerda standing alone without boots or mittens in the heart of frosty Finnmark. She began to run as swiftly as her little legs could carry her. Suddenly she was confronted by an onslaught of snowflakes, not falling from the sky but swirling along the ground towards her. These were no ordinary snowflakes. They grew larger as they drew closer and bore an uncanny semblance to the monstrous figures she had once observed under a magnifying glass. These were the Snow Queen's vanguard, their forms ghastly and bizarre. Some appeared like grotesque, overgrown porcupines, some knotted snakes writhing in all directions, and some resembled plump, bristling bears. All of them glistened with an eerie whiteness. They were animated snowflakes. The biting cold was so intense that Gerda's breath crystallized before her as she whispered the Lord's Prayer. Her breath transformed into a cloud of smoke, becoming denser, taking the form of tiny angels that grew larger as they touched the frosty ground. These angels donned helmets, carried shields and lances, and formed a protective legion around Gerda. They engaged the snowflakes, striking them with their lances, shattering them into thousands of fragments. The angels then warmed Gerda's hands and feet, and she continued her journey, undeterred and heartened, towards the Snow Queen's palace. But now let us see how little Kay was getting on. Little Gerda was furthest from his mind, and he hadn't the slightest idea that she was just outside the palace. The palace walls were as pure as driven snow. The windows and doors were as sharp as the knife-edged wind. This majestic palace housed over 100 halls. Each hall was formed by the whimsical drift of the snow, the largest of which stretched for miles. All were illuminated by the vibrant flare of the northern lights. These halls were vast and empty, with a radiant yet glacial brilliance. There was no trace of joviality in them, not even a simple dance for the polar bears. There were no storm blasts serving as music, no polar bears waltzing on their hind legs displaying their manners. There were no little parties for the cubs to play games like blind bear's buff or hide the paw kerchief. No afternoon coffee sessions for the white fox vixens to chatter over. The Snow Queen's halls were empty, expansive, and icy. The northern lights flared with such precision that one could predict their peak and fall. In the heart of these enormous, desolate snow halls was a frozen lake. It was fractured into 1,000 fragments, each shaped so similarly to the others that it seemed like a masterpiece of intricate craftsmanship. In the center of this frozen lake sat the Snow Queen when she was at home. She referred to this spot as sitting on her mirror of reason. She claimed that this mirror was matchless and the finest thing in the entire world. Little Kay, who was with her, was blue, nearly black, due to the frigid cold. However, he did not feel it because the Snow Queen had kissed away his icy shivers, leaving his heart almost as cold as ice. He was shifting some sharp, flat pieces of ice to and fro, trying to fit them into every conceivable pattern. He was very determined to create something meaningful from them. This might remind you of the Chinese puzzle game that we often play, where we manipulate little flat pieces of wood into intricate designs. Kay, in his chilly circumstance, was skillfully arranging his icy pieces in his mind. He was engaging in a game of cold logic. The patterns he created were incredibly remarkable and held immense importance for him. This was due to the chip of glass that had lodged in his eye, which altered his perceptions. He meticulously arranged his pieces to spell out various words, but he could never shape the one word he most desired to form. The elusive word was eternity. The Snow Queen had issued a challenge to him. If you can decipher this, you shall be your own master, and I'll present you the entire world along with a brand new pair of skates. The solution evaded him. Next, the Snow Queen announced her intention to make a swift journey to the warm countries, expressing her interest to observe the black cauldrons, referring to the volcanoes of Etna and Vesuvius. She needed to give them a coat of white, as, according to her, they lacked it, and that it would be a refreshing change from the yellow lemons and purple grapes she had seen. She then took off. Kay was left all alone in the endless, empty, frigid hall where he continued to puzzle over the icy pieces until he almost cracked his skull in frustration. Stillness enveloped him to the point that one might have mistaken him for a frozen statue. Suddenly, little Gerda made her way up to the palace through the great gate, which was a knife-edged wind. Despite the chilling wind, Gerda continued with her evening prayer, which seemed to calm the wind. She then entered the vast, cold, empty hall. Upon seeing Kay, she immediately knew it was him. She hurriedly ran to him, threw her arms around him, and held him close. She cried out, "Kay, dearest little Kay, I've found you at last!" But he sat still and stiff and cold. Gerda's hot tears fell upon him, seeping straight to his heart. They melted the ice and burned away the glass fragment within him. His gaze met hers as her voice filled the air, singing of a valley where roses bloomed and the Christ could be found. Overwhelmed, Kay wept, his tears washing away the glass piece in his eye. Recognizing her, he called out joyfully, "Gerda!" Delighted to be in her company again, he took in their surroundings. How cold, vast, and empty! He clung to Gerda, her laughter echoing around them, tears of joy marking their reunion. Their happiness was infectious, the surrounding glass sharing in their joy, dancing around them. As they grew tired, they fell into a pattern that spelled out the word the Snow Queen had set as a condition for Kay's freedom. Gerda showered him with kisses, turning his cheeks a rosy pink and his eyes as bright as hers. She kissed his hands and feet, restoring his strength and health. Now, the Snow Queen could return at any time, for Kay was free, as spelled out in letters of luminous ice. Hand in hand, they left the vast icy castle. They reminisced about their grandmother and the roses that bloomed on their roof. The harsh winds calmed, and the sun shone brightly as they journeyed on. When they approached the berry-covered bush, they were greeted by the reindeer with a young mate. who provided them with warm milk and affectionate kisses. The reindeer then escorted them to the Finn woman's home, where they warmed themselves and received guidance for their homeward journey. From there, they proceeded to the Lapp woman's dwelling, where new clothes and a sleigh awaited them. They raced alongside the reindeer to the edge of the north, where the onset of spring was evident. There they bid farewell to the reindeer and the Lapp woman. "Farewell," they all said. As the dawn began to break, the earliest birds started chirping, their sweet melodies breaking through the silence of the forest. All around, green buds were sprouting, promising the rebirth of life after a long winter. A rustling sound echoed through the woods, growing louder, and a young girl emerged, astride a magnificent horse. Gerda recognized the horse instantly. It was the one that had once been harnessed to the golden carriage. The girl was no longer a child. She wore a bright red cap on her head, a stark contrast against her raven hair, and a pair of pistols were fastened in her belt, a testament to her adventurous spirit. This was the little robber girl, the same one who had once been confined to her home, now embarking on a journey to the North Country. She was seeking something, perhaps an escape, perhaps a purpose, and if she couldn't find it in the North, well, there was a whole world for her to explore. Their eyes met, and recognition sparked instantly. Gerda and the little robber girl, now not so little. It was a joyous reunion, one filled with laughter and teasing. "You're quite the wanderer," she told little Kay, her words teasing but her eyes full of warmth. "I wonder if you're worth having someone chase you to the ends of the earth." Gerda, the peacemaker, deflected her question and asked her about the prince and the princess. "They are off exploring foreign lands," she responded, her gaze distant as if she were imagining their adventures. "And the crow?" Gerda asked. "Alas, the crow is no more," she replied with a sigh. "His companion mourns his loss, wearing a strip of black wool around her leg as a sign of her grief. She takes great pity on herself, but that's it is." With the pleasantries out of the way, Gerda and Kay relayed their story, one filled with hardships and triumphs. The robber girl listened attentively, her teasing smirk replaced with an earnest look. "Snip, snap, snurr, bacilleur," she exclaimed when they finished. "So all's well that ends well." The reunion was short-lived, as the girl had to continue her journey. Promising to visit them if she ever came to their town, she rode off, leaving Gerda and Kay to their journey. As they continued their way hand in hand, the landscape was a riot of color, the green of the land speckled with the vibrant hues of the blooming flowers. The distant tolling of church bells guided them towards their destination, and soon they could see the steeples of a familiar town. It was their hometown. They made their way to grandmother's house. Everything was just as they had left it. The ticking clock greeted them, its hands diligently keeping time. But as they crossed the threshold, they noticed one significant change. They were grown up now. As we tuck ourselves in for the night, let's remember this lesson. Love and friendship are our shield against adversity. Good night, dear ones. May your sleep be filled with dreams as sweet as Gerda's victory and as warm as her love for Kai.